And this is where it gets interesting for me. I watched your episode with Joe, where Jamie was able to pull up some video that you had personally been able to capture when you were able to get into one of these mines. And it essentially exceeds my vocabulary and my ability to describe what you see. And then there was he found the audio as well, too. And you hear what you were talking about, people not wearing protective gear of any kind. Like you said, mining a mineral or an element that is definitely going to seep through your skin, probably shouldn't be inhaled through your nose or mouth or just left to absorb. And there were thousands. It would have been, you had to freeze the frame and count each one of them, but it was unbelievable the conditions that they were working in. And that was one of, how many of those type of mines would you even estimate exist?
Oh, dozen, more, 10, 12, 15 scenes like that on any given day. And I think that image, that astounding image scene is the norm. It's not the anomaly. It's the norm at the bottom of cobalt supply chains. And to describe it for people who maybe didn't see it, I go into this industrial mine. Now, mind you, every tech and EV company selling us their gadgets and cars will tell you, will write in their public disclosures, we buy cobalt from ABC Industrial Mine, and there's no artisanal mining there. Artisanal mining is this ridiculous term used to describe that scene that we're about to talk about. There's no child labor in our supply chain at ABC Mine. All of it's done sustainably from an environmental standpoint. And you think, oh, terrific. They've got it together. Well, I get on the ground and I see that that's all a complete fiction. And this industrial mine that I went to and showed on the Rogan podcast, a little clip, the pit was filled with about 10,000 human beings crammed next to each other in a scene that you might think belonged 1,000 years ago. Or 2,000 years ago when the pyramids are being built, like this sea of humanity clanking with brute force against a mountain of cobalt stone to break down first a boulder and then boulders into stones and then stones into pebbles and then load that into a sack and load that into a truck and up the chain it goes. And it was an utterly unimaginable moment the first time I saw something like that, to think, how does this happen in the 21st century at the bottom of trillion-dollar supply chains and with no one even talking about it, acknowledging it? In fact, they're promoting fictions about what's really happening. And the asymmetry between the brute labor conditions, the toxic, destructive conditions that exist at the bottom of cobalt supply chains and the shiny showrooms where you get your phones and cars. It's just impossible to reconcile how that can exist in one value chain. And yet it does. And that's the truth that Cobalt Red is trying to bring to the world.
And that's where I was going with being fascinated by it. The amount of cognitive dissonance that is required, because I can't fathom a world where the major suppliers of cobalt who are marketing their clean cobalt supply chain, I can't fathom a possible world where they are not completely aware of the non-structured mining that is occurring just outside of the gates. Because just like you made the point on Rogan's podcast, it's not like the cobalt stops just because there's a fence. And if they're willingly buying it from, and another term that, very quaint, the artisanal. Are you kidding me? Could we possibly find a word that is less accurate for what these human beings are actually working their way through? So would you agree with that it would be impossible for these major organizations to not know that this is happening and that their supply chain is anything but clean?
I'm quite confident they're all aware. Now, they might not know the severity and scale of it because none of them have bothered to go there and see for themselves.
Which might be intentional. That might be an easy way for them to say, oh, I didn't know because I physically didn't go see.
Yes, exactly. they may not know the full severity and scale, but they know what's happening. They know people and Earth are being destroyed to feed cobalt up the chain, but they look the other way. They promote fictions and use these ridiculous terms like artisanal to portray a different kind of image. I mean, it comes down to word choice even when we concoct fake narratives. But they know what the reality is, but there's such a scramble to grab cobalt out of the ground, up the chain and into the phones, and especially the EVs. Okay, there's such a scramble that they're only looking forward and figure, well, this truth won't come out. And even if it does, we'll throw some more puffery and marketing terms and quaint claims and so on about it. And at the end of the day, here's our gamble. People don't really care. You know, the gamble is they're not worth the same as us. And that's why this entire catastrophe exists. Because, to your point, if they're aware of it, even if they're only aware of some part of it, why have they not done enough to address it? And the only answer to that question is because it's those people over there and not our people over here. It's that environment over there and not our environment over here. And they don't count less. They count less. They don't count the same as us, and they haven't for centuries. And that's the premise underneath all this, that the people and resources of Africa can continue to be pirated away, and we can continue to amass great fortunes on the backs of that violence. And at the end of the day, not enough people are going to care. And that was the logic of the original slavers in the slave trade, that at the end of the day, not enough people are going to care. And of course, great abolitionists came forward, pushed, brought the truth, and proved them wrong. And it's now our time, in this generation's time, to do the same with this catastrophe.
What happens when one of the major, and I could easily use some brand names, but I don't want to do that because there are only a few that I'm aware of, and I know that they're a small member of a larger whole, and I don't want to highlight one organization accidentally. But in this ecosystem, have you seen examples of when these major organizations are presented with this, like the video that you shared? It's beyond compelling, and I'd just be fascinated to hear what these organizations, how would they defend that? How would they justify or explain away their involvement in that? Or do they just ignore it?
Well, they just ignore it, right? But if you manage to get that video into the office of the CEO of one of these companies and say, you really need to see this, okay, then what would the response be? That's your question.
Essentially, yes.
And I think the answer would be something like this. Wow, that's a horror show that I can't even fathom. I can't comprehend that this exists in the 21st century, but it's not in my supply chain.
Oh.
Okay.
That's in other people's supply chain, not in mine.
Right. Now, if you managed in a short period of time to go to every CEO and you got that answer from all of them, because that's ultimately what they would say. That's awful, horrible, intolerable, but not in my supply chain. Well, if that's true of all these companies, where's all that cobalt going?
Yeah.
Okay. They're not digging it for sport. It's not going to Mars. The fact is it's in all their supply chains, but they can sort of make this claim, not mine, someone else's, and then just carry forward with business as usual. But the truth is it's in all their supply chains because it doesn't go anywhere else but their supply chains. And they need to then acknowledge that horror show in that video, and that is not some one-off anomaly. That's the norm. Get on the ground and sort out their supply chains.